and welcome to today's IIRSM branch meeting. I'm John Price and I'm currently the chair of the branch. Hopefully you will have received or shortly be receiving the latest Sentinel magazine, and within it you'll actually see there's been an update regarding the CRM system that's actually used by IIRSM. So it's been updated. It does mean though we're encouraging everybody to just log into my IIRSM and check your details, and especially when it does come to the branch that you're associated with. If you do have any questions, please do contact the admin team or even the branch itself directly. So hopefully we can ensure that everybody's details are all correct and you're getting all the relevant information that you need to. So I'm really pleased today to have Ray Bowen of Abbey Construction Consultants Limited with us. I've had the pleasure of working with Ray even on a number of occasions over the years. Ray's actually going to be covering the topic of CDM, health and safety law when using contractors. What you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is actually a Q&A box. We do encourage you, if you do have any questions, we will have time at the end of the session to ask Ray them. So if you do place them in the Q&A rather than in the chat box, it'll mean I can actually get those collated and we can cover those at the end. If we do have any shortness of time, we will try and hopefully endeavour to cover any questions that everybody's raised. So without further ado, I will actually hand over to Ray. So Ray, welcome.
Thank you very much, Joan. Welcome to everybody to this IIRSM presentation. I hope that you find it useful. It's a collection of information and experience gathered over the years when dealing with contractors coming onto various sites. So I hope you get some good information out of this. I'm going to switch my camera off because I have this fear that whilst I'm delivering a presentation, the internet starts to play funny and my voice gets distorted and you miss out on the information. So I turn my camera off and then you should get my full voice, hopefully. Okay. Okay, there we go. So let's start. So a quick introduction of who I am. I was the lead construction officer for a local authority, dealing with around £200 million worth of projects a year, which meant we had lots of contractors there to manage. I was voted the APS CDM Coordinator of the Year back in 2015. So the APS is the Association for Project Safety. I currently lecture at the University of Hull and I've done that for the past 9 years now. And I sit on the board of directors for the APS as past president. I've had 30 years experience in civil engineering construction management, and I am the current managing director of Abbey Construction Consultants. And for my sins, I get enjoyment out of marking NEBOSH exam papers or NEBOSH scripts. Okay, so we're going to look at CDM with the health and safety law when using contractors. So hopefully this presentation will give you information. Let's see if I can move that. Will give you information on what you need to do to comply with health and safety law if and when you are using contractors. However, it doesn't apply to temporary or agency workers because there is more specific information about them at the following link. I'm going to send a copy of this presentation over to Joe, so hopefully everyone who's registered and joined us today will get a copy of the presentation. So don't worry about trying to jot everything down, and that information will find its way over to you. So contractors, who and what are they? Well, contractors are professionals who provide the skills or services to companies for a set period of time. They can be contracted out for a set number of hours, or for a certain time frame, or for a part or full duration of a project. Contractors can be self-employed, they can work independently as sole traders, or they can run their own limited company. Independent contractors usually work for themselves and source their own clients. However, an umbrella company or an agency can also employ contractors. Those who work for a company may not have to find their own clients, as they can work with clients sourced by that company, and that company will also pay the contractor and their taxes. Whether employed or independent, contractors can work on one or multiple contracts at any given time. And that comes along with transferable skills. Contractors can often work with a variety of businesses. What does the HSE have to say about this? Well, there's 5 bullet points I've covered there. So there have been significant reductions in the number and rate of injuries over the last 20 years or more. Nevertheless, construction still remains a high-risk industry. Although it counts for only around 6% of employees in Britain, it also accounts for approximately 30% of fatal injuries to employees, with construction accounting for the second greatest number of fatal injuries of the industry sections, just behind agricultural. And over 10% of reported or major specified injuries. In 2018-19, 30 people was killed due to our activities. I've just been looking at the latest statistics, and 2022-23, that figure is 43 people. So it has increased. So we need to be aware of that and keep that in our minds as we look at bringing on contractors, especially if you're the client. You've got your responsibilities, and don't forget the accountabilities. That works hand in hand with that. Quick explanation on that. The responsibilities is your legal duties under health and safety law, and your accountabilities is something that you don't have to do, but you have to ensure is done. So for instance, a principal contractor, his responsibility is to deliver a suitable and sufficient up-to-date site induction. As a client, your accountability is to make sure that the client is in fact delivering them site inductions. So everyone needs to take the right precautions to reduce the risks of workplace dangers to employees and the public, and that's where we're going to look. Make sure everyone understands the part that they need to play in ensuring health and safety. What have they got to do? When have they got to do it? What documentation is there in place? What's the processes, procedures, and policies? Therefore, the client organisation would need to make somebody, preferably a competent person, who's got the responsibility for informing the contractor of the client's site rules and procedures. Along with that would go the permitted working hours, any no-go areas that can go and they can't go, they shouldn't go, and what the procedure is for permit to work, whether that's going to get done under the client's procedures or whether it's going to get done under the principal contractor procedures. And of course, the need for this information, which needs to be passed to subcontractors. And the reason I say some of this is some of the clients I work for, they will issue their own permit to work or their work authorization for coming out of a CDM area for isolating electricity or things like that. So the client will be responsible for that. But then within the CDM area, principal contractors are generally responsible for issuing their own permits. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to satisfy yourself that the contractor you choose can do the job safely and without risks to health. This means making sensible inquiries about the competence of the contractor. Have they got the right combination of skills, experience, knowledge, and behaviour? I'll come back to that point in a moment. The degree of competence required will depend on what work it is you're asking that contractor to undertake. Similarly, the level of inquiries you make should be determined again by the level of risks and the complexity of whatever the project specific is asking. There's always a need for public liability insurance, and you should also be checking any tasks, what's not covered by the insurance, and the required levels of cover. So quick explanation on those points. So bullet point 2. Competence of the contractor. So the new competence requirements have come out. So if you're looking at the general framework competence requirements, that's now BS 8670. I believe £90 to £95 is the cost for that piece of information. And then you've got the PAS 8671, which is competence of a principal designer, and PAS 8672, competence of a principal contractor. And my understanding is the two PAS documents, 8671 and 8672, are free to download. So you need to be setting out in your PQQs. First off, make sure your PQQ is in line with the BS and the PAS documents, so you're capturing that behavioural section. My experience as well is in PQQs, we tend to ask contractors if they've been prosecuted or going through a current prosecution, but we don't ask if they've received any fee for interventions and what was the nature of them fee for interventions. So there's another line you can add on to PQQs just to capture that. And then you look at their experience, their on-site experience, the workforce. Have they got the competence to do what the project is asking them to do? You may go out for some past references from works similar to the ones you're asking your contractors to undertake. And then the need for public liability insurance. It's always a gated section, is this, because if you can look on CHAS or Safe Contractor, sometimes or most times that information is there, but sometimes that information is out of date. If you go to tender and at the point they're returning the PQQs with the information, it may be that at that point their insurance is valid. However, by the time project starts, which could be anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, that insurance could have expired. Therefore, someone from the client organisation, i.e. the competent person, should be making a further request for the new insurance company. So you need to identify all aspects of the work that you want the contractor to do. And this could be in a bullet point format for the simple ones and possibly a little paragraph around some of the more complicated ones with further information for the more high risk ones. But that information has to be captured. What exactly is it you're asking this contractor to undertake? Once you've identified that, what is the health and safety implications of them doing the job? And this is around the client's site. So is there any gases, any fumes, any mists, any trip hazards, any working at height, etc. should all need to be identified and listed. And please remember that the level of risk will depend on the nature and complexity of the work what you're asking them to undertake. You should provide potential contractors with this information and make sure they know how and when to understand the performance that you expect of them. You could call this pre-construction information as confirming the nature of the health risks or the safety risks, and the construction phase plan, which comes back from the contractor. In my experience, sometimes that doesn't occur and it's just based on risk assessment process. Any site accidents, who should they be reported to? When should they be reported? And how does the client want that information? You've also got the requirements of RIDO, but as a client site, you should be saying to the contractor, if there's any incidents, accidents on this site, then you need to report it to the client within 24 hours. We prefer it in a written format, so it can be an email, as well as you complying with the requirements of RIDO. But as a separate entity, the client wants formal notification. So again, if that's what you want, you have to tell them. You need to consider contractors and subcontractors who may not fully understand the English language. Therefore, is there an interpreter? Can you use pictograms? How do you get the message about site rules across? One I've given you there could be a picture format. But as a client, you have to make sure they understand this. Note, if the work is construction or building work, as a client, you've got the additional duties under Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. If you look at L153, that will give you all the details you want, along with the CITB CDM 2015 guidance documents. So I'll put an example there of typical types of questions that you can ask your potential contractors. So the first one, what arrangements will you have for managing the work? For example, who will be responsible for this site? Who will be, how will the work be supervised? By who? What supervision are you having on this site? What checks are you going to make on equipment and materials, either pre-use, during use, after use, general maintenance? Will you be using subcontractors on this project? And if so, how are you checking their competence? And that level of competence for subcontractors will depend on the risk and complexity of the work. Just on that point, let's go back to the accountability, responsibility. So the client is responsible for doing the competence check on the contractor or principal contractor, principal designer. If it's a single contractor project, the contractor. But if the contractor or principal contractor brings on contractors or subcontractors, then they are responsible for undertaking the competence checks. The client is still accountable. What that means is the client has to make sure that the contractor or principal contractor is indeed undertaking them competence checks. So you could ask in a meeting or for a random sample, if there's 4 contractors on site, choose one, say, can you forward me the competence checks of this contractor, please, just to satisfy the client's accountability that you are indeed ensuring that they're fulfilling their duties. What is their recent health and safety performance? For example, how many accidents or cases of ill health have they suffered? Has the HSE taken any action against them? Have they suffered a fee for intervention? Have they got a procedure in place for recording or reporting near misses? And what happens to that information? How does the contractor or principal contractor act on that information? Have they got a written health and safety policy? As we all know, it's only a legal requirement if there's 5 or more people employed. But if they haven't got a health and safety policy, how do they get that information to their 3 or 4 workers? Can they provide you with an existing risk assessment which was undertaken for a similar project which is highlighting similar risks? And then you can assess that. Was it completed? Is it sufficient? Has it identified the risks? Again, written risk assessments are only required by law if 5 or more people are employed. And if that's the answer that they give you and they've only 4 employees, and the next question is, so how do you get that information across to them employees? And if they provide you with sufficient answer, that's fine. What qualifications, skills and experience have they got to undertake the type of project work that you're asking them to do, and review it? You could look at memberships such as IIRSM, any professional qualifications, NEBOSH qualifications, electrical, mechanical, but we should be taking a sample in line with the project specification. What health and safety information and training do you provide to your workers? So how do they liaise or communicate regarding health and safety with their workers once they're on the client site? Is it a notice board at the front? Do they have daily briefing meetings? Do they have weekly newsletters? What is the process in place? How are they meeting that requirement? And if required, have they got employers' liability compulsory insurance? If they say yes, then you would like a copy, which you can photocopy and pop into your project files. So I put a case study here. This is one from a tree surgeon who was felling a branch. It fell into a neighbouring garden, which damaged the fence panel. An hour earlier, the neighbour had been in the garden playing with a 20-month-old child. The tree surgeon had neither the qualifications to use a chainsaw nor the skill to carry out the job safely. If the property developer who hired the tree surgeon had checked that he was competent to carry out the work, then this incident would have been avoided. Don't just assume someone is competent because they've got the right work gear on, they've got the right tools. You must check. So I put competence here into 5 bubbles. Those 5 bubbles then make up the full circle. So the first one is skills. Have they got the skills to undertake what the project requirements is asking? And if they have, how do you measure that? 2, have they got the knowledge, the understanding to be able to deal with the project requirements? Have they got the ability and the attitude? Have they undertook regular training, familiarisation training or ongoing training? Or have they done the training 30 years ago, nothing since? And have they got the experience? Once you've asked those 5 bubbles and you've got the information in, you can then assess against your project requirements and deem whether that contractor is, in your opinion, competent or not. I look at this as a stage 1, 2, and 3 process. So the first stage, this is how I ratify this with my clients. First stage is an application to company's approved contractor list. So what that means is the PQQ is sent out, it's answered, relevant evidence is attached and sent back. And if that's deemed to be acceptable, then that either gets them onto the approved framework or satisfies the clients for stage 1, which is the organisational capability. That's what we're looking at for a stage 1. The company would then check their suitability. If approved, the company should be re-evaluated at regular intervals. This is once they've gone onto that framework. Again, don't forget that sometimes some companies re-evaluate framework contractors at 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, but insurances could expire in between them periods. So you need to make a note to ask for the renewal insurance document. Stage 2 evaluation is done once a project has been identified, and therefore pre-construction information, which is being drawn up by the client in assistance with the principal designer, should then be shared as part of a tendering process. This stage should be repeated for each new project because variations within the PCI will occur. Stage 3 is the stage that tends to get missed out for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. I said this is not a legal requirement. Stage 1, 2, and 3. It's how I break down competence to ensure I've covered all bases. So stage 3 would be a review of the HSE's prosecutions register. So you would log on to the HSE's website, put in the search bar prosecutions. It'll bring up a dialog box, which you can see says sort by. You can do it by hearing date, by breach, or by name of contractor or designer, etc. And it will bring up a box like this, and it will either say no results found, or it will tell you that the results have been found. And like this was the mailing attractions where the young lady who had to have a leg amputated from the knee when the rad collided. So I've just put that on as an example to show you. But don't forget, many PQQs don't ask for any interventions from the HSE regarding fee for interventions. They just ask for prosecutions. And don't forget, it's very difficult to mitigate in a court of law if something went seriously wrong, why you couldn't afford 1 or 2 minutes out of the project's duration to check on the HSE's prosecutions website. It has identified for me in the past where we've been procuring a working at height contractor for various items that work at height, and when we've looked on the prosecutions registers, they've suffered 3 prosecutions in the last 5 years. So we've just asked the contractor to come in for an interview and ask them what went wrong, what have they put in place to put it right, how have they measuring its effectiveness, has it worked, what's been the statistics since then. And if we're satisfied, then we will still employ. If we're not satisfied, then we'll discard and move on to another contractor. So it's not an automatically disqualification process. It's certainly an opportunity for an interview and further questioning. But it's a very quick and easy process. That information is being made available by the HSE, and we should be sourcing that information and using it in our favour. Okay, so that's my stage, what I'm calling my stage 3. Don't forget SSIP or safety schemes and procurement, such as CHAS, SafeMark, construction line, etc. Would also fall part of the stage 1. CSCS cards would form part of the stage 2. So don't forget your stage 1 is your organisational capability, insurance, member of professional bodies, experience, knowledge. But this stage 2 is the CSCS card stage, what I'm calling stage 2. And this is where people who's coming onto your site you're checking that they've got the necessary skills as individuals rather than on the organisational capability. So if the gas fitters, have they got a gas safe card? If they're electricians, have they got the ECS card? If they're road workers, have they got the necessary CSCS card or equivalent that can identify that they've undertook the necessary training and got that qualification or experience? In my experience, what normally happens is clients will bring contractors onto site, having got through the stage one, and then just allow them to do the work. But nothing has been checked for the contractors who come onto site, that them individuals that the contractors brought has got the right levels of skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviour. So I just do a random sample, 1 or 2 a day, just to satisfy that I'm carrying out my accountability on behalf of the client. PAS 91A1 2017, I'm aware I've left it in because I'm aware that that's still being used. People still not updated that now from the expiry of that in 22. Replaced with a BS 8670, PAS 8671 and PAS 8672 documents. The main one to replace that was the BS 8670, which is the general competence for frameworks, has replaced that. But I've left that in because it's very similar. There's 3 or 4 anomaly differences, if that. It is very similar, but there are the new sections of behavioural, what's come in, which PAS 91 plus A1 never had in place. Okay, this was another case law. This was a painter who fell from height. He was using a ladder and he fell more than 4 meters. Suffered serious injuries to his hip, leg, and 8 fractures to his knee. Following the HSE's investigation and prosecution, the HSE informed the client that tower or podium steps should have been in place rather than working from a ladder. As a result, West Lothian Council failed to properly plan and supervise that work and was fined £10,000. So one of the biggest things is communication. We're always hearing coordination and communication. So as a client, it's imperative that you make sure that this is in place, or client's representative. So you as the client and the contractor need to communicate with each other throughout the project's process or process duration. This can be site meetings, daily briefings, emails, phone conversations. We can go on with drawing registers, minutes from meetings, etc., etc., etc. But there should be an audit trail of how and when that communication is taking place. Also, make sure that the contractor and their employees have got information on the health and safety risks that they could face, and I've listed a few there, such as the asbestos report, asbestos register, the existing site risks, what the existing traffic routes are, existing speed limits, any no-go areas, any exclusion zones, etc. And then tell them what the measures are in place to deal with the risks above. One thing tends to get missed is what is the client's emergency phone number for if there's an emergency called. Where does the contractor expected to meet or to muster? Who do they report to? What number do they dial? So what is you as the client, what is your emergency procedures and contacts? The information you should provide should be in a form which is easily to read and to understand, bearing in mind not all contractors is English as a first language. Similarly, you must provide clear instructions, clear information, and make sure adequate training for your own employees. So if, as a client, if you're putting a project manager on there or a supervisor to manage the contractors, you have to make sure that they are also competent. Environmental considerations, so look at controlling pollution from air or noise, including vibration, dust prevention strategy, look at what type of dust capture systems or water suspension they're going to be using, where they're putting stockpiles and how they're managing that, what are they doing with the waste from site, have they got the waste transfer notes or licensed landfill, contaminated material waste, neutraliser waste and reuse transport orders, how are they managing and maintaining a quality of housekeeping, any fuels and chemical storage, implement a contingency plan to handle any spills, ensure that roads are kept clear by sweeping or using wheel washes or covering any loose loads, ensure that appropriate machinery for the site or building conditions is in place, and of course carry out joint inspections, so that's client and contractor together, so that nothing can be hid. If it's a project that falls into the realms of a notification to the HSE via the form F10, and the requirements for that is if the project is going to last longer than 30 working days and have more than 20 workers working simultaneously at any one point, or if it exceeds 500 person days. I'll say that last one again, exceeds 500 person days. It's not hours, it's days. So where a project is notifiable, the client must give notice in writing to the executive as soon as is practicable before construction begins. So I'll put a little example on here. Contractor's been awarded a contract to rewire part of a building. There's no other trades are required to do any work. The project will require just 2 people, and it's anticipated that the work will take 6 weeks, Monday to Friday. So here, 5 working days, because I've said it's Monday to Friday, working 5 working days per week, Monday to Friday, and I've said it's 6 weeks. 5 times 6 is 30, so that's your working days. I've also said 2 people, so 2 times 30 is 60, that's your 60 person days. And because you're under the requirements of a notification, you're less than 500 person days, and you're not going to have 20 people or more on site. An F10 or a notification on this occasion is not required. However, a pre-construction information and construction phase plan is required. Now, if it's small works of 1 or 2 days duration with low risk, then I would say that a suitable and sufficient well-developed risk assessment and method statement could replace a construction phase plan as long as it contained all the relevant information. There is no requirement to appoint a principal designer and principal contractor, because I've told you up here that it is a contractor, not contractors. And because it's a single contractor, there's no requirement for a health and safety file. I've given you another example just to try and explain that, which because of time, I'm not going to go through in detail, but you can reflect back on this when I forward this presentation on to Joe. So a further case study is a farm worker. So a farm worker received internal injuries and severe burns from electric shock when he lifted an irrigation pipe and it contacted 33,000 volts overhead power lines. The employer had not discussed the presence of the overhead lines and identified a safe way of moving the irrigation pipes. The employer should have made the contractor aware of the risks he faced and agreed a method of work before the job was started. Don't just assume that contractors will be aware of all risks, even if they seem obvious to you. And it's true what it says. You, as a client working day in, day out with these existing risks, such as overhead power lines, become blind to them, and therefore they don't get mentioned in pre-start meetings or in the appropriate documentation as required. This one actually takes some believing, but I assure you it's 100% case law. This was the development of 54 timber framed houses. The HSE went by and saw the development and stopped, so there was no accident, no radar, nothing. It was just a drive-by by the HSE which identified this. And the HSE identified that there was inadequate measures to prevent fire starting or spreading. In other words, there was no fire risk assessment, no fire policy, there was no muster point, there was no emergency escape routes, there was no emergency exit signs, there was nothing. And therefore there was a lack of site management and emergency planning, which prevented a risk to workers from fire. There was also a risk of workers being hit by construction vehicles. There was no traffic management plan, no segregation of traffic management or pedestrians. And the contractor was fined £100,000 plus just short of £5,000 in costs. The reason I use that one is, one, it's very difficult to believe that a client and contractor have not considered any fire protection when constructing 54 timber framed houses. But two, it just goes to show that there doesn't necessarily need to have been an accident, an incident, or an injury for the HSE to visit your site. So you still need to make sure that what you should have in place is in fact in place. Statistics, they are a little old, they need updating. I've already given you some statistics, but the one I tend to use is the bottom one. HSE have said they're going to stop publicising this information, which I've not seen this year. But if you look at 2018-19, which was just about pre-COVID, I think there was a bit of a lull during COVID for 2 or 3 years. But there was 1,609 prohibition notices with 1,316 improvement notices. Out of all those notices, there was 158 prosecution cases, which totaled in fines of 15.7 million. If you divide 15.7 million in fines by 158 prosecutions, it averages out at around £107,000 per conviction or per breach, which is an exceedingly high amount of money. There has to be some means of cooperation and coordination with the contractor. So as a client, both you and the contractor must work together and coordinate your activities to make sure that the work can be done safely and without risks to health. That's to both the client's employees, visitors, and contractors. One way of doing this is to have regular meetings throughout the works. The level of cooperation and coordination needed will depend on various factors, some of which could be the job, what's to be done, its risk level. The next one could be the number of contractors or subcontractors involved, could be a high number or low number. And the third one is the risks involved, either significant or either normal day-to-day risks, which a good, competent contractor should be familiar with. Don't forget managing and supervising the work. Decide what you need to do to manage contractors' work. This should be done before it goes out to tender. Who is going to be the responsible person on behalf of the client? The measures which you put in place should be consistent with the level of risk. If it's low risk, then you can have low presence. If it's high risk, then you want a greater presence. So the greater the risk, the more you will need to do. Consider the following. Who will be responsible for the work and what do you expect them to do? So you're writing them a summary. This is what I want you to do, and this is when I want you to do it. Who will supervise the work and how will they supervise it? And the reason I ask that is I've seen some supervision done from sat in a room looking at CCTV to the other end of the scale where there's a permanent supervisor on site who is up and down and monitoring and looking at risk assessments and measuring that against the work practices. How will the work be done and what precautions will need to be taken, i.e. what equipment should or should not be worked on or used? What PPE is to be used and who will provide it? So they get the answers to that off risk assessments as long as you're looking at them and familiar with them. What are the working procedures, including permits to work? Lockout, tag out. What's the procedures for this? Is it a client procedure or a contract procedure? Who's going to manage it? And what are the arrangements for stopping the work if there is a serious health and safety concern? Who's going to do that? How are they going to do that? So all this should be sorted before work commences on your site. Once the work has started, make sure that you can keep a check on how the work is going against what you've agreed. You can do this by carrying out regular checks or inspections. Ask yourself, are the control measures what are in place adequately controlling the risks which they're there to protect against? Investigating if things go wrong. Near miss, if it's a minor near miss, then it can be recorded. If it's a serious near miss, then do we need to do an investigation into that? Probably. What accidents have happened? Is that forming any trends? Is anyone suffering ill health from hand-down vibration to inhalation of dust? Ask yourselves what went wrong and what can we do to stop this happening again? After the job is finished, there'll be benefits in reviewing and learning from the lessons to see if performance can be improved in the future. I know this as a PPR or post-project review. So you take the good learning points and put them into one side, and you take the learning points from things that's not been so good, such as accidents, incidents, ill health, etc., and pop them in the other side. And then you've got a table there, and your way forward is to look at the negatives and see how you can turn them into a positive. So what additional measures would you put in the next project to stop the negatives from happening on that project? If you're not meeting, coordinating, or managing the works, you're not going to be in a position to capture that information. Therefore, you're not going to be in a position to ensure future works are safer. What contractors must do? Contractors must not carry out any construction work unless they're satisfied that the client is aware of their duties under CDM 2015. So as a client, you should receive a document from a contractor or principal contractor saying, dear client, under CDM 2015 or L153, these are your duties as a client to which you have full responsibility. They should satisfy themselves that the contractors or designers they engage are competent and adequately resourced. They should cooperate with the principal contractor if one's appointed or the contractor if not. And they should provide information to the principal contractor such as method statements, risk assessment, cost assessments, etc. They should comply with any reasonable directions from a principal contractor and with any relevant rules in the construction phase plan. I have an issue with the construction phase plan where I say principal contractors giving the construction phase plan to a contractor. He doesn't need the full construction phase plan. He just needs the element that's relative to the work that they're going to be undertaking. If you give somebody a 30, 40-page document, they'll probably not read it. If you give them 3 or 4 pages, what relates to them, they probably will read it. Contractors must also plan, manage and monitor their own work, taking into account the risks to those who could be affected by either their activities, and that would be by applying the 9 principles of prevention. They should report to the principal contractor accidents and dangerous occurrences, remembering the principal contractor has got a duty to notify the client, as well as RIDO. They should provide information that they've collated for drawing up the health and safety file. They should provide information, instruction, training and supervision to their employees during the project's duration. They must prevent unauthorised entry to the site and must provide suitable welfare facilities for anyone working under their control in accordance with Schedule 2 of the CDM regulations. Okay, we're nearly there, Joe. I'm conscious we're at Q2, so I think a couple of minutes left. The contractor, poor practice of working at height and scaffolding risks. This was on a small hotel refurbishment site. This was direct from the HSE. It's nothing I've seen or done. But poor scaffolding, I'd like you to try and picture this in your minds. Poor scaffolding found during the refurbishment of an hotel where, unsurprisingly, a prohibition notice was served. A roof of indeterminate strength was being used as a platform on which to foot the scaffold. At ground level, scaffolding standards were footed on loose timber boards, which were bridging and excavation. Some footings could not be examined due to the build-up of debris and scrap timber was being used to foot scaffolding rather than the proper sole plates and base plates. Okay, so if you've got that picture in your mind, there it is. I mean, it's one thing erecting a scaffolding off that roof, but it's another thing when employees are still climbing it and walking along the scaffolding. Excuse me. So that was the roof photographed by the HSE, and as I've said, the ground or the base, that's the base. Really takes some believing, doesn't it? Okay. This is the last slide. So we've we've got time for a few questions. So this is a really, really sad one, but it links back to that coordination and communication. So this was a security guard. This is on welfare, sorry. So this was a security guard. So basically, the client went to a security guard firm and asked if they could provide a security guard to during the 6 till 6 on a night till 6 in the morning to provide security for the site. They brought in a 10-foot steel cabin container, which was the hut for the security guard, and he had a receiver on his like a mobile phone, and he had to walk around the site, and every so often there'd be a scanner or a sender, and he'd rub his receiver along the scanner, and it registered the time that he'd done that. So in other words, the client or the security company had evidence that every hour the security guard was walking the site. It was -3 on this evening, and his generator failed, which meant he had no means of heating his cabin, bearing in mind it was -3. So he tried to get support from his company and couldn't make contact. In other words, nobody was answering his calls, and he tried the client's company and nobody there was answering the calls. So he was given no support. So he used his own initiative. He went out and found a wheelbarrow, put some old barbecue coals in it, pulled it into his small 10-foot steel porter cabin, lit the coals, and sat in front in an effort to keep warm. While he was sat there, the door was open, which was letting in a huge amount of cold air. Being -3, he decided to shut the door to keep the warmth in and the cold out. Fell asleep in his chair after being out in the cold and suddenly found himself in warmth, and unfortunately died of CO poisoning. It was deemed that there was a failure to provide a management system to protect the welfare and safety of workers. I think that fine is very low for that incident. However, I don't make fines, I just tell you what the information was. It was fined £16,000 plus £11,000 costs. And that's the end of the presentation. So we're about 10 minutes available, Joe, if you would like to come back on and field any questions.
Thank you, Ray. I was just trying to actually unclick my mute button very unsuccessfully. So I don't know if you want to unshare your screen now, Ray, and then we can we'll get some of the questions. Excellent. So thank you for your presentation, Ray, and I certainly am glad that my camera wasn't on when you showed those last case studies, especially if anyone could lip read. Very, very poignant. Again, I think hopefully everybody can agree that CDM is a topic that really should take quite a number of days with the training. So thank you for condensing it and all the detail you have over the time that you had available. And I'm glad you so much highlighted that whole participation, consultation, that communication piece, especially when you've got those multiple contractors on site, which is very, very valuable, because if you don't all know what each other's doing, how on earth can you keep each other safe? So we've had a number of questions. So let me just pull those up onto my screen. So firstly, I've been asked about managing of drug and alcohol testing and how basically you can include those contractors in, with the supply chain, and how best would you manage that, especially on site and with multiple contractors?
You could put it in either the form of contract, or you could have it in the client's site rules and agreements that if the principal contractor or contractors don't have or don't field random drug and alcohol testing, then the client can do it if they have suspicions or they get reports somebody on site is under the influence.
So basically making sure it's in there at the very beginning, at those early stages of engaging with the contractor, rather than just suddenly doing tests randomly without any notification, without informing their own employer.
Exactly. I may have got good and bad experiences about it. Some occasions I've rang up myself for a random drug or alcohol test and been told that somebody will be on site within 3 days.
Which is no good then at that point, is it? It's a bit too late, definitely. Excellent, thank you. You did touch on the area of safety schemes in procurement, as people know it as SSIP, within your actual presentation. Question that's been placed is, would you accept CHAS certification, safe contract with PQQ as evidence of competence? What I will say is, we know there are other organisations out there. We're not just picking on CHAS specifically or safe contractor. But, you know, are you, as part of that pre-qualification, happy to just take, you know, the competencies identified by the SSIP, or would you still do additional checks as well?
I would accept that they've gone through the any SSIP provider, that they've gone through the relevant checks and received the relevant evidence. However, it always comes with a clause, and in my experience, you need or a client needs to log on to CHAS or Safe Contractor or one of the SSIP providers and just do a bit more digging than just looking at the front certificate and checking. In my experience, I've seen where contractors have gone for work and provided the CHAS or Safe Contractor accreditation for a field of experience that's not within their realm. So you do need to, although I will accept them, but I will still go onto the sites and dig a bit deeper for my own satisfaction.
Yeah, I must admit, I've also seen where I've been onto site and when I've actually sort of looked and matched up the people on site versus actually the information that we've been provided with don't always collate.
Correct.
And you know, we've had, you know, I've suddenly going, why is that person using that machine when actually I haven't got any evidence of that particular competency, and at that point it stopped work.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
can I just remind people at this point, because a lot of people think that they get the CHAS or Safe Contractor or any SSIP provider certificate that box ticked, but as I give in the explanation of the presentation, that's stage 1 ticked. You've still got stage 2 and stage 3. You should still be checking the HSE's register, and you should be doing a random sample of site attendees, just asking for a CSCS card or similar or qualification, just to say that they're competent to do the job that they're doing. So it's, to me, it's a 3-stage process, not just the one.
I suppose it's also, you know, considering a lot of these processes when you're actually filling in those portals are annual, and a lot can change within that period of time from when they've originally uploaded all of that information. I know there's regular reminders to update the certificates, you know, things have expired during that period of time, but all that can actually happen during that their annual process of updating those portals.
Yeah, and it, like I keep saying, it's imperative to go and have a dig yourself. You know, one client I was doing this for, the client wanted to expel the contractor because their insurance had expired 2 months previously. I went onto the SSIP and did a bit further digging, and sure enough, it had expired 2 weeks previously. So rather than just leave it at that, I got in contact with the contractor and said, "Look, I've gone through the portal. SIP provider, and you're in site, so therefore the client's asking that you're taken off the tender list." At which point he sent me an email which contained the renewal insurance certificate, which he'd sent to the SSIP provider 8 weeks previously. They'd just not updated their site. So that's what I say when I say dig.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're not deferring that your own responsibilities to actually undertake this due diligence as part of your own processes. So another question we've had is in connection with the CSCS card, and the question's been asked that they believe it's recently changed, and do you have any understanding of what those changes may be to those requirements?
I do, but I'm involved with them changes, and therefore I can't say at this point, I'm afraid. But they are changing, and that information will be coming out shortly. But it's no dramatic change, so please carry on as you currently are.
Excellent, great, thank you, Ray. Another question we've had is, how would a health and safety file be presented or collated when it's small works?
Well, even as small works, if it's a single contractor project, then there is no legal requirement for an health and safety file. However, I always give the advice, if it's a single contractor project, then add a clause into the contract that you still require some information in order for you to draw up an health and safety file. But normally it depends how the client asks for it, and they should be asking for it in the pre-construction information. They should be setting out a file template, 1 to 16 files. Your first one being an overview of the project, file 2, the residual risks, file 3, the as-built drawings, etc. So that's how it should be done, through the PCI. And what I've done, I've created an health and safety file tracker, and I issue that as an appendices to the PCI, so that I tell the contractor or principal contractor, here's a list of documents that we want at the end of this project. Some of these you'll be able to collect before the end of the project, and therefore I'm going to be coming in and monitoring how you're collecting that.
Another question we've had in connection, it aligns really with you talking about competency previously, is how would you actually check the skills of a construction contractor?
Well, how many previous jobs have they done of a similar nature? What references have they got for undertaking that work? I mean, if when I used to work on my tools, if I'd done a really good job and the client was happy and my employer was happy, I'd just ask for a quick reference and drop it in a file, so I could always present that.
I suppose also that constant, making sure we've got the relevant measuring and monitoring steps in place with inspections, audits, etc., during the actual time of the work being done. And if we've
Well,
had
it is.
things
It's checking
reported
the
at that
skills.
point.
If they put pipe work up or cable trays, are they being put in the right location? Are they secure? Are they doing the job they're supposed to do? And if everything like that is gone right, that will come out in the reference, and that's a way of demonstrating that this person has got the right skills. They might have to use their initiative at times, in fact, a lot of times, to get over some of the problems or issues on site. But if they've got the skills, they're able to do that, and that should come out in references or that type of information.
So we have an observation that one of our attendees has encountered instances where operatives who do not have English as the first language often say yes, and they sort of positively agree that they understand. Often you'll maybe need to sort of repeat the question. Is there any sort of tips or ways that you've had to work in the past that might sort of assist in making it clear that the questions you've asked have been understood, the induction has been understood, especially when it is in a different language?
Yes, absolutely. I was in charge of a site what had 60 people on, and 59 of them people was Polish. And I have to say, did an excellent job. The workmanship was superb. Really, really good workers, but none of the 59 could understand English. So I asked for an interpreter on that site because they'd need that if the HSE came on site. The contractor agreed, put an interpreter on site, and I would ask questions. I would let people go in, watch the site induction. Then when they came out, I'd ask the interpreter to ask a different set of questions and see what responses I got as to their understanding. I asked that the risk assessments got pictograms added to it, so rather than stating the PPE, show pictures of an ADAT and take things like that. So it can be done. It's just more work.
Yeah, and it's understanding what you need to do. And at the end of the day, you've got that duty of care, so you've got to adapt and and make sure you are getting that message in a suitable methodology that's actually great for everybody.
And you
So
can
yeah,
always tell if they've understood the rules, Joe, because when you walk around site, you can see them all running around for their ADATs and putting the gloves on.
yeah, yeah, I've seen that on occasions as well. Um, Another question with regard to sort of inductions. At the very start of your presentation, you sort of mentioned the importance of inductions, and that the principal contractor will ensuring that actually is undertaken. And I know in my experience of seeing those inductions happen, principal contractors retaining them, but as a contractor, not me, but my clients that are contractors, sometimes actually getting hold of a copy of that induction for their own record is quite challenging. What's your thoughts on that? Because I know, I've requested on a few occasions, can we just have some evidence that our employees have been suitably inducted to your site? Or do you have to just take it as read that they've done that for you?
I tend to ask for a copy of the register. So where they've been inducted, they sign onto the register. They can exclude everybody off there apart from my employees, so I can demonstrate that. But I do have a thing with inductions, even in offices and things like that where people go and get inducted. For some reason, the inductions don't get updated, and
Yeah.
fire alarms will change, or an emergency exit may be blocked for a really good reason, and they have to use the fire exit, but the induction never gets updated. Construction site, the site risks change, the emergency routes change, but the induction still remains the same. It never gets updated, at which
Yeah,
point everybody should be re-inducted.
it's like control of change, isn't it? Which we all should manage suitably and think of every aspect of which we're touching upon, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Unfortunately, time has run away with us, and I'd like to thank you so much, Ray, for your valuable time today. And as always, an excellent presentation. So much condensed into such a short period of time. So thank you so much for your time as always. Can
You're
I thank
welcome.
everybody that's been attended? Hopefully you'll keep your eye out for our future presentations, and we have got a number of them being released shortly. On everybody's behalf, thank Ray for the time. Thank you all for your time as well. If anyone does have any questions that may want to sort of pass on, please contact us directly, and I'm sure we'll be able to help out. I wish you all the best for the remainder of your day, everybody, and hopefully see you soon on our next presentation. Thanks, Ray.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.